Just the two of us.
You
Yeah,
know,
so EFN's on a secret mission that he didn't
see,
want to tell us about.
right. So he's dipping out.
Yeah, but
Um, you want to talk about what I got a question for you, but let's talk about what transpired with your son if you feel like
oh
talking about that.
yeah, I'm happy to. So I guess let me set the context. So we always talk about how, like, sometimes how surprised we are at how similar our kids are to ourselves, right?
Right.
And it's a lot of shit that we don't even recognize about ourselves that we notice in them, and then somebody points out, like, that's you, that's how you are. For this one, I'm cognizant of it. But so my son the other day, and your son I think is like this too in some respect, where there's a sense of bullshit to some of the things that they do that you catch them and you're like, all right, this guy's, like, in my son's case, like trying to bleed out the amount of time that he's awake so that he doesn't have to go to sleep on time.
Right.
So so he calls me to his room. We tuck both of our younger kids in every night. That's kind of our routine. And then when we're tucking them in, he's getting in bed and he's like, Dad, I got to talk to you. And I'm like, is it life threatening? And he's like, no, it's not life threatening. I'm like, all right, is it serious? Like, is it important? Like, what's going on? He's like, well, kinda. And as soon as he said kinda, I'm like, all right, this is bullshit. This could wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever, we finished the routine, and then an hour later, my wife happens to check in to see if they fell asleep. My son was complaining about something, went to the bathroom, and then he was like upset, and she noticed, and she comes downstairs and she mentions it to me. So then I'm like, all right, let me go see what's going on. So I go back up, and I'm like, yo, what's going on, man? And he's like, Dad, I gotta talk to you. And I'm like, okay, all right, let's talk. What happened? And he comes up with something like he was like upset with me about,
Mm-hmm.
I forget what happened. Like, we were having a conversation. He said something that wasn't accurate, and I'm like, all right, well, that's not how it goes. And I'm kind of calling him out on the fact that it's not true. So he took that as me saying that he was dumb. I don't know how he came to that, but whatever. That's how he felt. So I was like,
He thought you thought he was dumb or said he was
right.
dumb.
Like,
Oh, okay.
he thought that without saying the words "you're dumb," like, what I guess whatever my reaction was,
Right.
insinuated that he was dumb is how he
Okay.
interpreted it. So I'm clearing that up. I'm like, bro, if anything, every day I'm telling you that you're super bright, and there's moments where you try to pretend like you're dumb, but you know that I know. So why do that?
Right.
And whatever, that got put to bed. I tucked it back in, and I was like, good night, and I left. As I'm leaving his room, he gets up out of the bed and comes to me and is like, Dad, can I give you a hug? Like, ready to burst into tears. And then I'm like, yeah, of course.
Right.
And he hugs me and he's bawling. And I, like, it was like like in a moment that all happened. And I'm like, shit, I really must have, did I call him stupid? Like, what the fuck did I do? And then he comes out and he's like, I'm scared that you guys are gonna die. And I'm like, fuck. And so to bring
You just want to go to bed.
well, I mean, I was still gonna be up, but I'm like, yo, this is heavy.
Yeah.
And then I come back to my own fear of my mortality. It's something that I've always, like, I know it's coming. At some point, we all have to go through death. It happens. The older we get, the more people around us are going to pass away, and we got to kind of get accustomed to it. But it's something that I'm not cool with. I don't think anybody technically is cool with it, but I struggle with it. Like, sometimes I find myself thinking about, like, yo, this ride's going to end. And now I see that in him, and I'm wondering what triggered it. And he referred to, I guess in passing, every now and again, we'll be like, yo, we're trying to teach you how to be your own person so that when we're not around no more, you're able to fend for yourself.
Right.
And you don't necessarily need mom and dad to do everything for you. So he kind of referenced something to that effect.
Yeah.
Bro, we spent like 10 minutes him bawling. I went, I laid down with him and he was just crying. And then finally I'm like, yo, you okay? It's like, I didn't address it. I kind of just left it alone because what am I going to say? Yo, everybody dies.
Right.
That's the way it goes.
Make it worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of let it out. And then, I tucked him back in. I'm like, yo, you're going to sleep like a baby now because you let that cry out. And and kind of left it alone. And we haven't really
Yeah.
touched the topic again, but it got me thinking like, yo, do I need to go get a counselor? Do I need to get a therapist? Like, how do we start dealing with this in a way that's going to make his whole situation more bearable if and when that eventual day comes that we're not around anymore?
Do you think that I think it's no doubt that he was pondering that, or it was in his head somehow. I wonder sometimes, because sometimes like my son will have those kind of late night bedtime, all of a sudden, just something triggers and he has some kind of meltdown, for whatever reason. Not too often, but I mean there are those times. But sometimes it's almost like it's attributed to just being overtired, and then he's feeling a certain way, and then I feel like maybe he's just pulling from something that was just tucked away inside, and then it just comes out, but it's not necessarily like he was pondering on it too hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to tell because I'm not in his head.
It's and and I feel like we're relatively, I'd give us more credit than relatively. I think we're pretty good about having a sense of what triggers what for our kids.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, we can catch, I think, most things. And for this one, we're both kind of stumped. The only thing we can track it back to is, unfortunately, we had a close friend of the family pass away recently, right, and she'd been battling cancer for a bit. And, that was a close enough friend of the family that all of us knew what was going on.
So your son is aware of what happened?
Yeah, we actually went to go visit her at some point at the hospital. So he knew what was up. I mean, I think in his head, it was like, she's sick in the hospital.
Yeah.
She'll rebound. And that's what we were all hoping for. But, it took a toll on her, and she ultimately passed away. He wasn't aware that she passed away when this happened, but maybe there's anxiety because my wife was going through it as well. Maybe he was feeling that.
Right.
That brought all this to the surface.
Could definitely be.
But yeah. So anyway, that has me now going down the path of like, all right, so how do we help him? Right. Is it a therapist? My wife brought up like, let's go to church and like see if, the folks at the church can like help us from a spiritual perspective, like put this into perspective for him. A friend of mine who's a psychologist, psychologist, not psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
She had given me some advice on like how to approach him and like resources to look into, like a school psychologist, which I didn't even think of. With all the taxes I pay for school, like, yes, they have these resources at school.
Yeah.
So like she was like, yeah, have them evaluate him and just see what comes back, and maybe you can start figuring out what to do from there.
Yeah, I'm always, I guess it's a good thing. I'm always a little suspect of it, especially when they're young. I don't know. Like my son, he's had his little bouts here and there with anxiety, but I also think some of it is just natural growing up, and kids like things to be in sync a lot. The more that there's a what's the word I'm looking for?
A routine.
Like a routine. Yeah. And then when the routines break or things are in flux or changing, the changes for them as well. So I think, we've talked about this with his pediatrician before, and she's said, well, maybe, you have him speak to someone, and maybe just talking to a counselor or someone to help alleviate some of the anxiety. And it's more maybe sleep related, like going to sleep sometimes. If he starts thinking about like he's not gonna have a good, he's not gonna be able to fall asleep, and he's gonna be tired in the morning, or one of us are not around, we're traveling. Like my wife is traveling this whole week, so it's just been the two of us, and he definitely had a hard time going to sleep the other night. Like the sadness of missing his mom then starts triggering all this other stuff about, am I going to be okay sleeping? Can I fall asleep in time? All that kind of stuff.
Is it do you get to, well, you speak to your wife, so I'm sure you have a sense. When you're gone, is the magnitude of how he feels, I guess, bad or what have you, like, the negative feelings, is it worse when you're gone or is it worse when she's gone?
It's hard to say. I think the other night might have been probably worse than when I'm gone, but just because I've been gone more as of late than she has. She hasn't really traveled like she used to. So this was kind of like her first time away again.
Got it.
So I expected it. He got over it. I mean, we actually kind of laughed about it the next day because we talked about it. Like I'm like, look, the thing he started telling me like, look, these are the things that I'm worried about. That's why and I'm like, well, you do realize that those things that you're worrying about, the worry itself are the things that are going to manifest and be the result of what you're worrying about. You know what I mean? Like you're creating it. Like, you know, if you're worried about not getting enough sleep and not feeling good in the morning, well, because you're worrying about that, that's going to keep you up and now you're not going to get enough sleep, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I know it makes sense. And then, just kind of joked about it a little bit. Like, I'm like, you do know that you made yourself sick just by worrying about it. Like,
Right.
he's like, yeah, I know. He's like, yeah. so, so at least we can have these conversations and be aware of it. And I don't know. I guess it's tough. Like going back to, does your son speak to someone else about it, or is it helpful? Is it not? I don't know. Maybe it is helpful, but then I also don't want to like. I wouldn't want to give my son a complex like,
Oh,
oh
because
shit,
you've seen
there's
shrink.
right,
Yeah.
or there's something wrong with me, or why do I need to speak to this person about if it's not really that big a deal. I don't know. I'm not educated enough in this, and I can't say that I've ever done any counseling or any of that kind of stuff before.
So I think I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say that historically you've looked at this like it was weird, and
I don't
because
think
of that,
no, I don't think it's weird.
yeah, I'm
I
speaking
think
for you. I'm putting
no,
words.
no, 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 no. I don't think it's weird. I've never done it, right? So,
Yeah.
but I do understand, but I do know I do understand that like talking things out that you're feeling, especially to someone who's going to be non-judgmental or might offer some other advice, I'm sure it can be helpful. Um, but on the flip side, so yeah, what I was saying was, I don't find it weird. I do feel that the idea of being able to talk to someone and kind of air out what you're feeling, especially without any judgments, is probably a great thing. Um, I wonder though, for young kids, and maybe I'm sure it's helpful. And again, I just don't have enough knowledge of it or experience with it. I just wonder, like, especially if we don't think that our kids have that big of an issue with something, like, does having them speak to someone like a counselor or whatever, does that then make them feel, oh, is there something wrong with me? Does it that do they start to hold on to that as opposed to it being helpful? And I could be totally wrong. I have no idea. I'm just voicing that as like that's my kind of conundrum with that shit.
So for me, and it's probably just a little different. For me, it's more just like to some degree, it is the stigma of what that signifies to the general public, right?
Right.
I still struggle with that. I believe wholeheartedly that therapy is very helpful
Yeah.
for
Agreed.
everyone, right?
Yep.
Not just people who might suffer from a particular thing or go through a traumatic episode or what have you. Like I think everyone can benefit. Frankly, I mean, we talked about this plenty of times on our show, but like the big thing I get out of doing this podcast every week is therapy.
Right.
It is being able to share our experiences, have conversation. You guys check me, or I can check y'all, and we just really have discourse around being fathers. That's invaluable to me. And so I can see something similar when it comes to a therapist if you got the right one. Now,
Right.
I bet you we'd be shocked, and I have no real knowledge except for one example that I'll share in a second of how many kids are seeing therapists and not maybe in the context of like the really um like crazy
Right.
examples that might come out there, like
Right. It's more like casual therapy type.
right,
Yeah.
right. And so when I shared kind of what I went through with my son recently in the Fly Dad chat group that we have, by the way, you
Mm.
can sign up at flydadgear.com/dad group. It's free, and we just kick it about fatherhood in there and try to help each other out. One of the guys in there, he was sharing like how he has his son, who is 11, in therapy,
Hmm.
and I thought like I brought up my scenario with my son and
Yeah.
told him like, yo, I'm probably gonna go down this path of therapy. Does anybody have a kid in therapy? Like, can you share your experience? And for him, it sounds like, again, it wasn't one of those things where something happened that was crazy, in their
Yeah.
lives for them to jump into it. Just it was like a positive thing. It was like organically kind of fell into it, and it's been
Yeah.
good. And so I was like, huh, like that's cool. I see that as really positive. I'm gonna ask though, like, has there been anything to suggest that his son is going to be dealing with like how people look at him now because he is in therapy? Because that's something I didn't really think about, but it could potentially be an issue among their peers.
You think should our kids ever get whoa, nice.
Sorry.
When our kids get older or even should they ever hear any of these episodes, you think they're going to be pissed at us for airing all their
I think about this a lot. I think there's going to be different stages of it. I think
yeah.
when they're in their teenage years, they're going to be pissed. When they're in their young adulthood, probably
I mean, they
still.
might never hear it, but
Oh no, they're going to hear it.
mm,
They're gonna something will draw them. Like there's gonna come a point where fatherhoods is gonna be like the shit, and then people are gonna go look back in the catalog, and our kids are gonna be one of those people. And then I think when they hit like their 30s, they're gonna appreciate what we're talking about.
mm,
So it's gonna be like the 3 stages of fatherhoods and their kids
right.
type shit.
Here's a quick question for you, and we'll talk about it again another time with E. And so my son's getting to the point where he's asking a lot of questions, right? And we start talking about things. We've talked about this in the past about, our kids aware of what drugs are and drinking and just whatever kind of behavior, right? And so he'll often ask me like, well, why do people, what happens when someone, what are illegal drugs or what happens when people steal or, just whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so, I try to explain things to him without getting too crazy in detail. Um, but I'm just waiting for the hammer to drop where he's in one of these question modes one day and then asks, well, Dad, have you ever done X, Y, and Z? And I got to talk to my wife about this. I've been meaning to talk to her about this because I'm curious as to like what our kind of combined stance would be on, because I'm torn between the call it like the cipher sounds way of
Just being honest.
yeah, versus the sugar coated a little bit or put it to the side, like we'll
Like
talk
you
about this,
already.
like we'll talk about this when you're older or something like that. And I'm curious, I need to talk to my wife and ask her what she thinks about it, because I know that we've had convos in the past where we've heard like other parent, we've talked about where we've heard other parents have kind of laid certain things out or told their kids like the cold hard truth of in certain things, and both of us were like, well, damn, that's a little, they're too
Too
kind
young
of
for
too
that.
young to know about that kind of stuff. But now we're gonna be faced with those. And look, I've done a lot of dumb shit in my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm curious, what's your thought on that?
It's tough. Like for me, it's not gonna be hard because I've never done any drugs. So for me, it's
or not necessarily all drugs, but even like, Dad, have you ever been drunk before? Have you ever thrown up?
we've that we've already had those
Yeah,
conversations.
yeah,
And so it's interesting because I think we're conditioned to keep alcohol separate
right,
from substance abuse, right?
yeah.
But I think I bucket it. I should bucket it all together. The
Or just getting in trouble in general, doing dumb stuff. Like
I've, I'm
once
pretty
those questions come,
I'm
how
pretty
truthful are you going to be up front?
I'm pretty transparent
Yeah,
about it. I think I would have a much more difficult time if I was talking about drugs, like non-alcohol
right,
related.
right. Yeah,
Um, and the reason is I think I would have more fear of them going down that path because they know that their parent might have gone through it and
and came out
came
okay.
out
Right.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
So that would be the hesitation I have. But I also think it's a catch 22 because if you're able to get to him first, lay the foundation, explain to him what drew you to X, and I don't mean ecstasy. I'm just saying using a letter in the alphabet here. What drew you to that particular drug, and then why you decided to move away from it, and that might be beneficial to helping them figure out, like, because I'm assuming, knowing you the way I do, you don't want him to have to deal with any of that shit. But curiosity at some point will come and there'll be that temptation. And if he has some foundational understanding, it may benefit him from taking the wrong thing or not doing anything at all.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the inner fight that you kind of have between being honest or sugarcoating.
Yeah. I mean, I think eventually, and again, this question isn't all about drugs. It's just about, let's just call it dumb shit
That
in
stuff.
general.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I think the total honest foundation will be there for sure at some point. I'm just not sure when.
The timing, I think, is something you definitely have to weigh
Yeah,
because they're
because you're
not
right. I
always
do
that
want
way.
to. I do want to lay that foundation of like, okay, this is what can happen if you do X, Y, and Z, and here's experience. Stay away from doing whatever, whatever the case may be.
Do you find that your son is really transparent about everything, or does he hold back certain things and then you find out later that he should have told you something, a few days ago, a month ago, a year ago, but it never came up?
It's a combo. There are times where he's pretty upfront about things, and then there are other times where, let's say we're having a all guard down conversation. He might say, well, this thing that happened a couple days ago, I left out a
Okay.
couple things, you know what I mean?
That's
So I'm
my issue with my son. My
trying to
daughters,
get him
yeah.
away from that. Um,
Yeah, because that's where it gets dangerous for me. Like weighing all of that, right? When do you have that conversation? How transparent do you want to be? When you have stuff like that, that scares me because my
yeah,
son is like that, and he might try some stuff on the sneak, and then we come to find out later that X or Y happened, and then he's like, like, for instance, he'll be, I don't know, playing in the schoolyard, and then he'll hop himself onto a structure that he knows he shouldn't be on top of,
right.
jumps and like scrapes himself. But we don't find out because it's in a place on his body where he could hide it easily.
Yeah.
And then we find out days later because he slipped up somewhere, and then the truth comes out. And then something different could have happened, right? He could have gotten really severely hurt or, something terrible. And then it's all because he was trying to be sneaky, doing the thing he knows he shouldn't be doing. Versus my daughters, they'll tell us if something like that were to happen or if they had the thought that came to mind to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I treat like how I approach conversations with my son a little bit more direct and like really try to paint a vivid picture for him of
Yeah.
what the different paths can lead to. I don't have to go that detail with my daughters because they're more forthcoming with information.
That's interesting.
Scary.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, it's something to ponder on. my wife gets back, I'm gonna have that conversation with her because I know that I can just feel those questions coming soon.
Do you think your wife would err on the side of transparency? Like, what's your if you had to forecast what that conversation is going to yield? What would you say?
I would say I know that she would probably say transparency at some point for sure. I don't think now though.
Okay.
I think maybe that's more of and I almost feel that way too. I think it's more of a
wait.
Save that question for later when we can have a more in-depth conversation about it.
When we
I
can
don't
talk
want to.
about it.
I don't want to say like, oh, you won't understand it right now because that's belittling, right?
Right.
But frame it in a way where it's like we're going to talk about whatever that question is later on down the line.
Be like, yo, we'll have a drink one day and talk about it.
Right.
All right, Kay. Well,
all right, man.
Good luck, bro. I'll talk to
same
you
to
soon.
you. All right, later.
Later.